You don't fall in love the way you think you do. You repeat it. Not the person, not the story, but the feeling of it. The tension, the comfort, the distance, and the urgency. Something in it feels familiar, and familiarity is often what the mind trusts, even when it hurts. Long before you had language for relationships, you were already learning how they work. You learned it in pauses, in tone, in presence, and in absence. A glance that reassured you, a silence that confused you, a response that came too late or too sharply or not at all. None of this felt like learning at that time. It simply felt like life. But your body was paying attention, shaping quiet conclusions about what closeness means and what it costs. These conclusions did not stay in childhood. They followed you, not as memories, but as patterns. You do not remember deciding how to love. You just find yourself doing it in the same way, again and again. Some people move through relationships with a certain steadiness. They are able to be close without feeling consumed by it. They do not interpret every shift as a threat, nor do they feel the need to retreat when things deepen. Their sense of self remains intact whether someone is near or far. This is what secure attachment looks like. It's not perfection, but a kind of internal stability. There is an underlying assumption that connection will not collapse without a warning, and that they are not at the risk of being erased within it. But not everyone learned love in a way that allows for that ease. For some, love feels uncertain from the very beginning. There is a pull towards closeness, but it comes with a constant undercurrent of doubt. They find themselves watching, interpreting, and trying to make sense of small changes: tone, timing, attention. A delayed reply feels heavier than it should. A slight distance feels like beginning of an end. It is not that they love more deeply than others. It is that their system has learned that closeness is not stable, and so it stays alert, trying to secure something that never quite feels guaranteed. This is the anxious pattern, not an excess of emotion, but a relationship shaped by unpredictability. Others move in the opposite direction. They keep a certain distance even when they care. Intimacy can feel intrusive, as though it demands more than they are willing or able to give. They value independence, often to the point where relying on someone feels unnatural. When relationships begin to require emotional presence, they may withdraw, not out of indifference, but out of a quiet discomfort they struggle to explain. They have learned in some way that closeness comes with pressure or disappointment or a loss of control. So they maintain space because space feels manageable. This is the avoidant pattern, less about not feeling and more about not trusting what closeness might ask of them. And then there are those who move between both states, unable to settle into either. They want connection but cannot remain in it. They reach for it and then they resist it. They open and then shut down. There is no clear rhythm, only a push and pull that leaves both them and their other person disoriented. This pattern often forms when the source of comfort was also the source of distress. When closeness itself carried contradiction, the result is a system that does not know whether to approach or to protect, and so it does both, often at the same time. None of these patterns are random. They are responses that once made sense in a very specific environment. What you call your way of loving is in many cases a way of managing what love once felt like. The problem is not these patterns exist. The problem is that they operate without being seen. They shape your choices, your reactions, your interpretations, while you assume you are simply responding to the present. But much of what feels immediate is not about the moment in front of you. It is about something older, something already learned. You may believe that you are reacting to a person's behavior, when in reality you are reacting to what the behavior represents to you. Distance does not just feel like distance, it feels like a loss. Closeness does not just feel like intimacy, it feels like risk. And so the response becomes disproportionate, not because you are irrational, but because the meaning attached to these moments is heavier than the moment itself. Understanding this does not instantly change how you relate. Instead, it creates a gap between what you feel and what you do, a brief interruption in the pattern. Instead of moving immediately, seeking reassurance, withdrawing, over-explaining, or shutting down, you begin to notice that impulse before you act on it. You start to recognize the familiar shape of your reactions, the urgency that rises too quickly, the distance that appears too suddenly, and the conflict between wanting closeness and resisting it. The awareness is not a solution, but it is the beginning of one. Because once you can see the pattern, you are no longer entirely inside it. You have a choice, even if it is a small one, that is to pause. To question the meaning you are assigning, to respond in a way that does not fully obey the old logic. Over time, these small interruptions accumulate. The system begins to register a different experience. That closeness does not always lead to loss. That space does not always mean abandonment. That vulnerability does not always result in harm. This is how change happens. Not through force, but through sudden transformation, but through repeated exposure to a different outcome. You do not become secure by convincing yourself you are. You become secure by having enough experiences where the old expectations are no longer formed, and slowly the pattern loses its authority. But there is another layer to this that often goes unnoticed. The way you relate to others is closely tied to the way you relate to yourself. If you tend to abandon your own needs the moment someone pulls away, the anxiety in your relationship will only intensify. If you dismiss your own emotions to maintain control, distance will feel like the safest place to exist. If you look outward for reassurance because you do not trust your own sense of worth, no amount of validation will feel sufficient for too long. In this way, your attachment style is not only something that plays out between you and another person. It is something that plays out within you, quietly shaping how you respond to your own thoughts, your own emotions, and your own discomfort. Do you stay with yourself when things feel uncertain, or do you immediately try to escape that feeling? Do you listen to your needs, or do you override them, keep something from slipping away? Do you allow yourself to feel, or do you shut it down before it can take up any space? These questions are not separate from your relationships. They are the center of them. Because the more consistent you become with yourself, the less reactive you become with others. The more you learn to hold your uncertainty, the less you demand that someone else resolve it for you. The more you allow yourself to experience closeness internally, the less threatening it feels externally. What changes is not how you connect with people, but the foundation from which you connect. The way you learned to love does not disappear, but it stops being the only way you know how to.